All right, welcome back to another edition of the Dirty Verdict podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Peter Taaffe.
I'm your other host, Kyle Herbert.
And I'm batting cleanup at the number 3 slot. I know it's not the number 4 spot, Bill Ogden.
And before we introduce our guests, because I forget, and it's usually at the end.
Yes.
We're powered by chaostheory.digital and or Strategy Group and Coma Mediation and the Herbert Law Firm and Fair and Ball.
Yes, sir.
Also, if you like our show, follow us on Instagram. You can listen to us on Spotify, YouTube. We have some TikTok posting. Really, anywhere you can get your podcast, you should be able to find it.
And just because that initial list of sponsors is distinguished and complete doesn't mean we're not looking for more.
And if the internet requires you to get an ID verification to listen to this, all you got to do is get into VPN, talk to Pete, all about that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
We've invited several folks out there, though, to sponsor, and no one has taken us out for it on it.
Still waiting.
I laid the groundwork for a VPN company to sponsor us, and so we're eagerly awaiting all inquiries. All right, now get into the meat of things. We've got a very special guest today, a longtime friend of mine, Bret Stanley. Thanks for joining us, Bret.
Thanks for having me. Quite the setup you have here, guys. Looks pretty cool.
Yeah, this is, we got most of this from Goodwill.
Yeah.
And some of it from Bill's Garage.
Goodwill's now a sponsor. Thank you. Maybe.
Yeah, there you go. No, Kyle he has an alter ego and he does his own private stuff that we don't ask about, but fortunately we get a couple hours every Tuesday that we can do some good stuff.
That's true. Litigate, and I decorate offices in case you need anything.
The tripods are Kyle's.
Yeah.
So Bret,
hey now.
So at the time we talked about asking you on, I said, well, you're right down the street because you're at Kirker Garcia, and but just as we talked today, that's recently changed. Is that right?
Yeah, in about the last couple of months. So I worked with Steve Kirker and Jesus Garcia, Kirker Garcia for about 4.5 years, and at the turn of this year, I started working with Johnson Law Group. Also have some ability to do more stuff on my own. But Johnson Law Group is who I'm with for the most part now, with some freedom otherwise.
So good. And I'll say for anyone, just we'll preview this. If you've got, even though this is a legal podcast and we talk law stuff, there's going to be a lot of stuff that Bret's going to educate us about on ride sharing and some of the risks, particularly if you've got kids, as y'all do, that are kind of coming up in the world of where they will start using Ubers and Lyfts. Definitely for me, when my kids do it all the time. Anyone who, or anyone, it's not just kids, but definitely kids are, as I think Bret will tell us, have a special vulnerability there. So we'll get into that in detail, but that's hopefully we're going to cover quite a bit of that.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
So Bret, before you were with Kirker Garcia, where did you work?
I worked with Craig Island in Galveston.
All right.
So Craig is from the Ernest Canning Coacher Tree, and so I got to do a lot of fun stuff with Craig. Worked with him for almost 10 years. Lived in League City, was down in his Galveston office, in between there and Austin when he was in Austin, and did a lot of stuff with Craig. So
I ran into Craig Island at the Kansas-Texas basketball game in Lawrence about a month ago.
Sharp-dressed man. Did he have pinstripes on?
No, it was casual Craig Island because he was pounding some nachos at the Oriad Hotel.
Perfect.
But, I first met Craig when I was like a junior or sophomore in high school. He introduced me to George Bush, and who was the then governor.
The war criminal or the other war criminal?
Settle down.
Craig Island's a war criminal? Or? No, George Bush.
George W. He introduced me to W. In Austin, and to the lieutenant governor, Bob Bullock, who gave me a bear hug on the floor of the Senate and invited me out to meet him on 6th Street for cocktails. And I was like, sir, I'm only 17. But Craig, I know he didn't remember me, but I got to chat with him in Lawrence. He's really good guy as far as I can tell.
Definitely a mentor of mine. Still keep up with him, talk with him often.
And he's in Austin now permanently?
He's in Austin. He has the Galveston office still. He and David Bonin it's Island and Bonin now. David mans the Galveston office, and Craig is primarily in Austin, but rides back and forth once or twice a month.
So. Yep. And that's probably where we first met, we probably worked on some stuff together.
Yep.
Prior to that, was that first job out of school, or did you do?
No, before that, I taught school and coached baseball. And teaching school is one of the hardest things, man. And anytime I try a case, I try to make sure they know I was a teacher. That's a good little, yeah, because you're going to have educators on your panel, and it really is difficult. Chase me right to law school is what I say. You coach, and that was fulfilling. Teaching was great, but it was just really difficult. And I didn't love it enough before I got out of teaching, I thought I was going to go on the administrative track and maybe principal and superintendent and stuff, but I didn't love it enough to go down with the ship. And so
Which high school?
I was in Austin at William B. Travis on the south side of Old Torf. Tough school, but
What is their mascot?
it was the Running Rebels. I think it still might be the Rebels, but I don't know.
Is it Travis? Were they like brown and gold?
Travis is red and white. And it's one of the oldest schools in Austin. One of the first three of the Austin Independent School District. It was Travis and
Reagan.
Travis, Austin-Heim, McCallum. Were the first three, and then Reagan came after.
Travis is pretty small compared to some of the other. It's just kind of landlocked, right?
It is. It's a 4A school, and it's going to be that way pretty much.
Yeah,
pulls from a tough area, and it's a tough spot.
So you went to law school after first job out of law school was with Craig?
That's right.
Okay, so prior to that, where'd you go to law school?
I went to Thurgood Marshall here in Houston.
Okay, and then prior to that, you were working at Travis as a teacher and baseball coach?
Teacher and baseball coach.
How long?
For just a year. I did my student teaching there and coached when I was a student teacher, and then they hired me. So I counted as 2 years, but student teaching and then taught at the same school.
All right. And then that undergrad?
Undergrad, I went to UT in Austin. Right.
Got it.
I'm originally from Atlanta, Texas, and Northeast Texas, Cass County, way in the corner. From Houston, up 59, 4.5 hours.
What'd you study at UT?
History, liberal arts. I think that's how I got in.
What year did you graduate?
06. But I took the victory lap so that we could beat Oklahoma and win a national championship.
Oh, gosh. You were there for some great years. I was a history major at UT.
Back in the 80s.
70s, early 70s.
You've aged well.
I was a lot like Wooderson, just on campus there. It was really nice.
Yeah, so Atlanta, Texas. Well, Tony Busby's from Queen City, but I think he uses Atlanta a lot too because people don't know where Queen City is. And then also famous Texas baseball player Drew Stubbs.
Drew Stubbs played baseball. I was 2 years older than him, and so that was fun to watch him play in college.
Did y'all play together in high school?
We did.
Yeah, good. Taught him everything he knows.
You didn't play in college?
So I played club at Texas.
Oh, okay.
And so that was fun all the way through. But didn't play otherwise. Once I got into Texas, it was. I knew I wasn't going to be a pro. I was a slow catcher,
And Augie Garrido back in the day was mean as shit.
Have you seen that clip? Where
Everybody's seen that clip.
It's great.
Yeah, we recommended. I don't know if Josh can post it where he's yelling at them at the end of the game. Just light them out of the high.
I think that was in 04, 05, and they'd had a highly ranked team, and then it was like 2 weeks into, or 15 games into the season, and he came in and just
It's like a destroyed game.
Yes, it was a fall in 2009.
If you say you didn't see it, you look.
Right.
So you're a catcher?
I was a catcher.
I like catcher.
Yeah, I loved it.
We can. Y'all want to
Comparing,
His replacement.
yeah, and 10 years, just did my vicarious living from my 6U baseball team, which we had a competitive game last night with my son. So that was something. The parents were
What part of town?
on the west side of Spring Branch Memorial Sports Associations.
Yeah.
Like the Beltway and I-10 is where we live.
Got it.
good. Okay, so law school. So you're teaching. You think you may do that quickly. You realize maybe not. So why did you decide to go to law school?
You were teaching and you were like, what am I going to do with all this money and time?
Mhm.
That's right. And because of that, it was tough. Teaching was super rewarding. It's just the trajectory afterwards. And really the principal there was doing the right things, had the right curriculum, had the right motivation, but he couldn't get the students and the teachers and the parents to walk together.
Mhm.
He was going to get fired. And so that's why I went to law school. Let's do something where if you work hard, you can minimize that risk and have a different trajectory on what's next. And it was great path for me.
Slightly bigger upside on the law side, too.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to talk also about your recent kind of change because I think it's an interesting kind of something happened on the plaintiff side where a lot of people are doing like what you're doing. But let's get into the media thing. So what is your involvement in the Uber MDL? We've talked about multi-district litigation. What is your role with that?
Right. So the Uber litigation and I have a long, almost a 5-year relationship. I've been litigating against Uber on behalf of drivers against Uber in the wage context for 4.5 years, arbitrated 10 cases against Uber to final verdict, and under the FLSA standard, claiming the drivers are employees, and it's very difficult in Texas. Arbitrated the first case in California through final verdict, claiming that drivers are employees under their standard before Prop 22, and we won. We've had the first verdict there. in an arbitration context. So from that, I've gotten a lot of information on them, and I'm able to go get documents and policies and lots of corporate rep testimony. And my friends were also pursuing sexual assault cases, and I helped create the MDL by going to the JPML panel, which is the panel that you have to argue to request an MDL before, and argued in front of them to create this, because we were seeing Uber's ability to track these bad actors but still leave them on the platform. And that's our allegation, is that they leave them on the platform.
Where's that MDL at?
So this one is in the Northern District of California. So the MDL for rideshare sexual assault cases against Uber was established in November of last year. And so from then we've gone, it's in front of Judge Breyer in the Northern District of California. We go about every 5 weeks before him for different hearings. After it was created by the JPML, I was added to the Plaintiff Steering Committee. So there's 7 of us that are on the Plaintiff Steering Committee, and above us are 3 co-leads. So there's 10 of us that are pushing the litigation, and then 1 liaison counsel that helps with matters between the MDL and the state court consolidation that's existing as well.
So I hear MDL. I in my mind imagine there must be a lot of claims to justify that. So I've got 2 questions. The first one is, how many of these? What's the rate of incidence?
Right.
Is it a ton?
Yep. And so Uber gives 1 billion rides in the United States every year, 1 billion with a B. Between 2017 and 2020, Uber has released 2 safety reports where they've identified the worst 5 categories of sexual assault, and they've said that they had 10,000 between that period. And that's Uber in a year over those 4 years.
4 years. Okay.
Yeah. And that's Uber just giving it enough data on 5 of their counting metrics of the worst types of sexual assault. And that's forced sex, penetration. That's forced kissing and then groping under the clothes. And those are the categories that they count. Now, there are a bunch of others, like where they see that drivers have masturbated or they indecent exposure.
I told you we would not get through an episode without talking about masturbation.
Had to bring it up.
That's on Pete.
And so it happens all the time, like where riders get in the car and someone's has their genitalia out, right? To say it in the best way possible.
So my second question is, and this is like the consumer rider protection portion of the show. I was at a CLE a couple of weeks ago where somebody was talking about the same thing. And the speaker was saying, don't ever accept water from an Uber driver. Tell people where you're going. What's the modus operandi? How are the most vicious assaults happening? Is it just an attack right away? Do they drug people, or do you know?
Yeah. So back to your first question, kind of put a bow on it. We don't know how many times this happens because Uber has all that data, and this is an interesting injury because people don't want to talk about it, and so that's something that's difficult. The amount of sexual assaults that are underreported are like 80%. Which means only 20% are actually reported. And so the more that we're out there talking about this and the more that we're giving people information, or the more that people are advertising the problems that Uber has on their platform, the more people will start raising their hands that this is a problem. I think that probably a year, hundreds of thousands of people are being groped or attempted to be groped. I think it's a much bigger issue, and we'll find that out. Now, all those people won't stand up, but it's a problem. What it seems to me, by looking at some of the policies and the information that Uber has, is that people aren't just getting in the car. Drivers aren't getting in the car for the first time and doing something terrible to someone. Drivers know that the barrier to entry to get into Uber driving is very low. You just need a car, you need a driver's license, you need insurance. And they also know that they're going to have a captive audience at certain times. They know that they're going to go to some place like Washington Street, like in Houston, or some bar district, and at 11 p.m., someone's going to get in the car that might be drunk or might be inebriated. And so when it's that late, they go there for that purpose.
I got you.
And then they work their way into it. They understand how the system works. They start with acting weird, and Uber counts metrics on just strange activity. Like if someone's intuition's up and you say something, Uber's counting that as a tally, but they're leaving people on the system or making contact with them. If the driver puts their hand on someone, that goes in the system. And so you see this work up until the wrong person gets in the vehicle with the wrong driver, and then that happens. And I don't want it to seem like this is happening all the time where it's 99% of Uber drivers are bad people. These people are trying to do their best, most of them. But there's so many drivers, so many rides. You have a statistically relevant section where this many people in society that have these problems are driving for Uber.
I mean, shit, 2,500 over 4 years. I mean, you're looking at 3 a day.
Right. Well, and that's just what we know.
Self-aware.
Yeah, on the worst categories. We don't know what the true numbers are.
When you say worst categories, is that like...
Yeah. So
financial trade, invisible.
Right. Correct.
I don't say that word, Colin.
Yeah. So
let the experts say that word.
Sorry. You was quick. Yeah. Penetration is a tough one. But so they count 21 different categories of sexual misconduct and sexual assault, right? And so that goes from leering, suggestive speaking, talking about what he would do or she would do to somebody else, things like that. And it goes down in severity to touching over the top of clothes, touching sexual body parts, touching non-sexual body parts in a way that's sexual, like, and then indecent exposure, masturbation, or things that they aren't reporting in that worst category. And I think those are some of the problems that are going to be some of those cases. I think are some of the worst because they layer on different elements, right? It's not just touching over the clothes. It's touching over the clothes and indecent exposure. It's touching over the clothes and then flying down the highway in a way that's terrifying, or taking you off the highway, off your route in a way that's scary. And so it's difficult to know each individual case, how that's going to impact the rider, because there's layers to what's happening.
Are there similar claims against the other carriers like Lyft? And
there are. The way that we made an MDL is that there are 2 different California consolidations, one against Lyft, one against Uber in California, in San Francisco in the Superior Division. And one of the judges for Lyft has a different opinion on a forum non-convenes motion versus what the Uber judge did. The Uber judge said that if you are not a California resident, you cannot bring your claim in California, even though Uber is a forum defendant, right? And so it kicked out all of these cases.
What was on FNC?
That's right.
And you say they're forum defendant, meaning they're based in San Francisco?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. And all the data is hosted in California.
Yes.
Huh.
The Lyft judge had the opposite ruling. So non-California residents can maintain claims against Lyft there in California. And that really made way for this MDL. Now, I still think a Lyft MDL could be established if people filed the cases and wanted to be outside the JCCP, because you wouldn't have to be there, and it's easy to get into federal court. You just don't sue the driver. Anybody outside of California, like many MDLs are created, if there's a forum defendant in California, you just sue them if you're a non-California resident. But it hasn't yet.
JCCP is the California state equivalent of federal MDL.
Correct, yeah.
So what is the scope of the federal MDL that you were on the steering committee? Like what they call tag-along actions, someone files a case in another federal district, what is the scope that will draw a case from, say, South Carolina over there and do your MDL?
A driver that commits sexual assault or sexual misconduct to a rider.
That's it?
Scope. That's right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But it's not. So rider cases are not part of this, where if a rider commits sexual assault against drivers, which that occurs, then those would not come into the MDL, because this is just driver focused.
Got it.
They narrowed the scope for that so that we could have light claims and a nexus of claims to bring over.
How many cases y'all have?
So right now there's about 300 filed in the MDL, and that's a pretty good start for such a growing MDL. But the judge is excellent for all sides, we believe, but we think he's an excellent judge for an MDL. He pushes cases. We're going to have a trial by the end of next year, which will be pretty fast. He wants to outpace the JCCP, and he knows how to manage MDLs very well.
Are y'all picking bellwether cases now?
So he has said he doesn't like bellwethers.
Okay.
But I think what's going to happen is we're going to try individual issues, right? So maybe the common carrier issue, or maybe we try the employment issue under California law, or the employment issue under FLSA standard. I think the employment issue is a driving fact of Uber's action here, because the more that they're in the car, the more control they have. So if they're overtly in the car, then they are managing the independent contractor, so-called, that they call the driver an independent contractor. And so they could have the video on, the forward-facing video on the phone, and record everything. But that means that there's overt presence in the car, and they're being watched and monitored actively. Now, they're monitoring them anyway, but video recording is a heightened level of that. And so the law is not really caught up with this gig economy on the independent contractor question, because who could have thought that there would be any independent contractor that would work for a phone, like an app, right? It's outpacing the law, the way that they arbitrate cases.
Yeah, what's interesting is the insurance companies, regular Allstate, they have something that you can plug into your USB of your car, I think, and they say you get better rates because it'll show if you're a safe driver. The safe driver discount.
Not me.
Yeah. Well, you would think that they could do the same, and let's just talk about just safe driving.
Correct.
That they could do the same with their drivers, plug it in with AI.
Correct.
You can figure out, all right, this guy, Kyle Herbert, is unsafe because he exceeded the speed limit 22% of the time, and he whatever, and we need to kick that.
They already do.
Okay, so they have that.
The app and the phone has the ability to tell them fast braking. If they're speeding, they follow that.
How is it possible that any of the Uber drivers I've been in their cars in the last 2 years passed any of those metrics? I mean, we can get into this later, but
It's different for us, though, because you drive Uber Pool. We just drive Uber Black.
So that's the funny thing is I do drive Uber Black exclusively, and I would say 2 of the last 10 rides, I yelled at the guy and was like, "You got to pull over and get me out of this car."
Right. So they, like I said, they give 1 billion rides in the United States a year. They need every driver on the road to service their product. Everyone, because everyone that's not on the road they're not able to meet the demand.
So who would you ride with?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I think that the main thing is for everyone, if something crazy happens, you need to report it to Uber, right? And that way the tally marks continue. I don't have Uber on my phone because I know the amount of data that they can get from anybody that has the app on there, and it worries me.
Okay.
I just don't, and I litigate against them, and it's been this ongoing saga. That's really the only kind of crazy kind of tinfoil hat thing that I've ever done with the defendant, and I've litigated against some of the biggest ones. It's like I don't need their app on my phone because I know they can listen in. It's just a problem. But
you could feed him rat poison.
I should ride. Maybe I should get it right.
Well, how do you take Uber rides?
If there's
a burner phone,
I've got my burner phone. Don't tell my wife.
Yeah,
just kidding. 70. So no, I would say that I take Lyft, right, which is somewhat duplicitous. I recognize that, but if I'm at the airport, I take a cab. If there's cabs readily available, I take a cab.
A lot of single women I know take Alto.
Alto they are employees. They have more control over the situation. They're monitoring it better, I believe.
So I have Alto, but the problem is, it takes them 30 minutes to come get you. You got to plan it.
And they're a Houston company, and so you can have more access to here than.
I didn't know this. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
They do like a lot of driver safety training too, right? Yeah.
And they all have standard forms that completely clean cars. The problem is, if you're going home from the club, as I know you are wont to do, Bill.
I don't know any clubs in Houston.
Alto works if you can plan ahead.
Right.
Otherwise, you wait.
So Uber Black it used to be Uber Black drivers were chauffeurs that had livery license. They've changed that recently where really Uber Black is you meet a certain standard plus have a nice car. And so that's not the higher level.
By nice car, you mean a 1999 Sienna with a actual window AC unit plugged into the side of the wall? Because
I don't know if that would meet their standard, but
somebody's not meeting the standard.
Paid $99 for that ride.
Yeah.
I think that's another reason. It is part of our society now. It is part of the way we get around, right? Which is another reason why they have to do better to make it safe. If we all rely on them in a way like this, they have to do better, and they have the data.
And so I think you touched on this. What is their financial incentive to not be more protective, whatever, discerning about who they let use the Uber as on the driver's side?
Right. So
Uber app.
So they have trips that sometimes go unfulfilled, and that means that there's nobody that they can push that trip to service it. So that's a financial incentive. They drive that number down as low as possible. And generally it is pretty low. It's below 10%, I believe, normally. And so they need people to drive, and they need them on the road. And so they incentivize them in many different ways to get them out, to go to certain places, to be at the Toyota Center when the concert breaks, or to be out at the rodeo. They incentivize them over and over to pull them out there. You pay a higher rate, then they make more money, or they believe they'll make more money that way. Drivers can't control how much they make ever. That's an Uber thing. But the more drivers they have out, the more that they can service the customer, which is the rider. So,
okay. And then let's go back and we'll talk about the passenger side. So how much data does the driver know about the passenger that is riding with them?
Right. So before the ride, the driver generally won't know where the passenger's going, won't know what the total fee is that he's going to get or the total fare, cannot control the amount of the fare that he's going to receive. So he can't control the per mile or per minute payment that he's going to receive. The driver, when he gets to the location, the driver gets the name of the person and their star rating, and there's a number that he can call through the app that's not the same rider's real number.
Got it.
That's shielded from them. So very little. It's similar to what you would see of your driver when they're on the way, except you know at least his license plate number, right? So it's very little. So it's both a blind connection. You know very little, and you can't control which driver you get, other than if you want a Black or an Uber X. The driver has zero control over the rider that he gets. There could be two drivers on the same block.
But does it assign it by proximity?
It's supposed to assign by proximity, but then also Uber puts in incentives for riders. Like, Pete, if you used Uber all the time and you were one of their VIPs, then you would be paired with higher ranked or higher rated drivers. Sorry, you'd be paired with higher rated drivers if available. And so that means that if you were driving, you would have a problem, right? You would be able to be. If you weren't hired.
Is that why Ubers are constantly circling Bill's office and Bill's apartment?
That's right.
Well, I was going to say, Kyle, pull out your phone, pull up your Uber app. What's your star rating?
I have no idea. Let's check it out.
Oh, he's counting.
Should we make bets on who's got the highest?
I don't even know if it existed.
Mine's lower than I thought. So open it up and you just click account bottom right. And it'll be top left under your name.
Uber.
Well, now they're going to listen to us.
Oh, they've been listening.
I'm 495.
Oh, nerd. You don't even party in Ubers.
I don't report anything. I don't threaten the guy to.
Kyle, I think go to account, bottom right, Kyle, and then top left under your name.
Kyle just gave a star.
Oh,
3.9. I was kidding. I'm 4.8.
Beautiful. I'm 4.81. So you see,
star rating is interesting because for drivers, they use star rating as a quality metric, of course. But each city has a different star rating that a driver must obtain in order to maintain access to the app. But they don't tell the driver what that is. And so they manipulate it up and down. They say that each city has different factors based on social impacts and things like that.
How can I figure out why people didn't give me a 5 star?
They don't let you know that. They don't let you know when you will just see a reduction. And then look, there are times where people rate each other on reasons that aren't connected with the trip.
Yeah.
And just are being mean. But generally that's not true. And Uber wipes those out most of the time. Like, they take those off. If you complain, let's say you gave someone a bad rating because there was traffic, Uber would wipe that.
Yeah.
It's interesting now that I'm on this I clicked my account on my Uber app, and it is a safety checkup that you can do, a privacy checkup, and then Uber for teens. Invite your teenagers to set up their own account.
Yep. So that's brand new. Forever, Uber would not allow anyone to use their system that was 17 or younger.
Huh.
And recently, as in the past 6 months, they've created this Uber for teen. And so it just, like you said,
that seems
top of the show.
Dangerous.
So do you know whether or not these drivers for the Uber teen are
is this actually
or are they registered on any list?
That's what they say. I mean, so Uber, a lot of people, when they attack these cases, they try to make it from a standpoint of you didn't do an appropriate background check. But the background check isn't going to show probably the information that you need in order to remove a bad actor from the app. I don't think Uber's letting many registered sex offenders on their system. I think that they're catching those. But it's the ones that have not committed any crime but are been to commit some sort of act like this, and then they go and get the right opportunity.
The other thing is there any quality control? Because it's happened a couple of times with me where I've got an Uber and I've got the name of the person, and somebody pulls out a bill for you, and it's not the same car,
Right.
or not the same person driving. So it's just a buddy driving on your account because they don't have a car or something.
That is strictly prohibited. Should never happen.
How do they police it at all?
That's the only way they would police it is if you reported it.
Okay.
Right. And
they're always like, this seems like a fun adventure.
and
Let's do it.
I don't ever. So most times you don't really pay attention. They just say, "Bill," you're like, "Yep, that's me," and you just get in.
And there have been horrible occurrences where someone does the same thing, they get in the wrong car and something terrible happens. There's been law changes that have occurred based on certain cases where this has happened, where someone gets in the car and they're brutally murdered in a way that's incredibly terrible because they got in the wrong car. But this person is holding themselves out as an Uber driver, so that happens.
The only time I've ever put one of my kids in an Uber by themselves was like on our way to a CPS hearing.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't.
We wanted to arrive separately.
That's right.
Yeah. So, question on the MDL, this illegal thing. So obviously the MDL, the concept is these are all very common cases and they should all have some uniform rulings from one judge rather than 300 different rulings.
Okay.
But at some point, every case has its own facts in that this driver, you're saying Uber should have picked up, this driver shouldn't have been on the road or had access to the Uber app and Uber passengers. But everyone is going to be unique, right? As far as how many strikes they had, how many red flags were up on them, right? And so those are, ultimately, that's going to have to be decided in an individual trial, right?
Correct. It's one of the reasons Uber argued that an MDL should not be created is because you have two things. You have an intervening bad actor. And they're at this point, they're pointing to the independent contractor driver. We don't control him. He's done something bad.
It's usually a him. Right.
It usually is, although it's not always, but it's, I think, like 75 or 80% of their drivers are men. So they were pointing to that, and they said these facts are so different. You have one person that has had a groping incident. You have one person that has had just a sexually explicit discussion or all these things. And the nexus of it is that Uber controls the pairing, Uber controls all the data and allows these and has these drivers on their system. And so we can get to a point where we do all this general causation discovery, which is what they call it on the front side, where the judge works it up to get all the corporate representative depositions, all the witness depositions, looks at different types of information that Uber collected and the sexual misconducts that Uber knows of and they don't know of. They produce information about the drivers. We produce information about all the riders that are injured. Gets worked up to a certain point where it is ready for trial, and that is a moving gray area target based on what the judge believes is trial ready. And then the judge can then start remanding cases, and that means he can look at, okay, these cases for this specific fact or from this state or that happened in this time period are all going back to their home jurisdictions. So if you lived in Houston, it would go back to the Southern District of Texas, Houston Division, for trial, and they would be assigned. And so that's how MDLs are designed to work. Sometimes judges hold on to MDLs longer, and they will not remand cases because they claim that cases aren't trial ready. It's really up to the judge what that looks like. But this judge is not going to do that. This judge is going to move them quickly. He was the judge in Jewel. That took a little bit longer because of COVID, but that was a big litigation and big MDL that they had to work out, and he worked that really to resolution ultimately. But he's very, very knowledgeable and has worked up a lot of MDLs.
So what if you're filing a case against Uber and the driver here in Houston? I assume you file in Harris County, you just one-off it?
Yep, one-off it. And I think that's the beauty of this MDL too for other lawyers that are looking at it. If you got a case that you think is particularly heinous or has a subset of facts that you think is great and you're a trial lawyer and you want to get after it, all you have to do is get the ride receipt, and on it generally will say the driver's first name and his license plate number. You can find that driver, you sue, you bring diversity in a good jurisdiction, and I think everybody on leadership wants that to happen, assuming the individual wants to try the case and work it up. And if that happens, I'm happy to help too. Like,
discovery's kind of done.
Yeah, we want to. Well, it's on for sure,
but a lot of the discovery all done.
But I mean, even from a leadership perspective, I'm going to file cases in one-off jurisdictions, and if they're in good jurisdictions that you know well, like Harris County, where you know that you can get justice for your clients, definitely do it.
Is there a Texas state MDL?
There's not yet. There's not a consolidation here, not in Texas.
Who represents Uber in Texas?
So Normally, I see well, Uber does something interesting. And this is just my opinion of why they do it. They move their defense counsel around so that
they're insured now. Is it progressive?
Yeah, it depends on if you're talking about car wrecks or you're talking about different types of injuries.
Yeah. So I've had a bunch of hearings with progressive assigned counsel where they're arguing why their UM policy should never pay out because there's other coverage and we make you buy this coverage.
But on these
Second, make sure that you never have to.
on these sexual assault.
So Shook Hardy's doing the MDL work.
Okay.
Right? Shook Hardy and Paul Weiss are the two defense firms that are doing the MDL work. Uber moves around who the defense counsel is state by state. I think they do it so that each defense counsel won't know the internal workings, won't know the documents. And because I've dealt with Uber's defense counsel before that have told me these documents don't exist. And I know they exist. They're on your desk. And so it's like, well,
I want to compartmentalize the risk.
I'm not asking for a policy that's not a term of art. This is the name of the policy and the date on it. And this is who signed it, right? Give me the policy. And so I've seen that happen. I'm not saying they do that all the time. I don't know if they do that everywhere, but I know that it appears to me at least that they do that purposely so that their defense can not know documents. And that's not a slight against, look at me backpedaling on a public forum. That's not a slight against the defense counsel because I don't think they're given documents. But at some point, they've got to produce stuff that we know to exist.
Yeah, that does happen from time to time, doesn't it, Peter?
Well, that's what you said. So just to backtrack for a non-lawyer, so diversity, if you sue the driver, Joe Smith, and Uber, and you're also a Texas resident, and the driver's Texas resident, Uber's obviously California and probably Delaware. I think we're in Delaware.
Correct.
So they can't remove the case to federal court, which generally plaintiffs do not want to be in federal.
Well, even if you're not a Texas resident as the plaintiff, as long as the defense is.
Yeah, right. And as long as the defendant is a Texas resident, they cannot remove
That's the way the law is now. They still sometimes remove and still sometimes win those arguments. And I think from the plaintiff side, we would say if we have a forum defendant, meaning a defendant that's from the jurisdiction of the state that you're filing in, it should not be removed because you have a forum defendant. But if your plaintiff is not from the same state as the defendant, then Uber sometimes will come in and snap remove, which is a technique to pull it out immediately. I'm talking about the case.
Yeah.
And or try to remove otherwise.
So just for the lawyers, and this is kind of inside baseball, talk real quick about snap removal because that's a relatively new concept.
Right. It is the way that a case is removed generally at the time of filing before you even can serve the defendant when they believe diversity exists, meaning all of the parties aren't from the same state. Then they immediately remove it to the nearest federal court and take you out of state court, and you have to get in a jurisdictional fight. It happens with big defendants who are monitoring the dockets, and before they even are served, you get a motion to remove, and it's already out of your hands, and you've got to go through this.
Or not a motion, a notice.
A notice.
It's done.
Yeah, it must be removed.
The way around it for lawyers is to serve your in-state defendant and get an answer
immediately,
and then add out-of-state defendant.
Right. But as Bret was saying, the sophisticated defendants monitor the filings, and they'll jump in even before service.
Oh no, I'm saying file against your in-state as well.
Yeah. So you're saying sue the individual only first. Later. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's the way to completely prevent snap removal. The problem with that is your primary defendant may not be the first name defendant on your pleadings. And so it won't look like Miss Smith versus Uber. It'll look like Miss Smith versus Mr.
David Jones,
whomever, right? And so that can be used against you as well by the defendants. But the worry of that is, I think, less than making sure that you can stay in the venue that you like.
Yeah.
And diversity was made so that diversity removal was made so that out-of-state defendants will get hometowned in a state they're not from.
Yeah. When they remove, do they say fraudulent joinder? Because I can't imagine that.
They do. Oh, okay. They say fraudulent joinder. They say all kinds of things.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they say because the notice, like you said, requires removal immediately.
You'll brief the remand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we went sideways. there's also a case you just filed on behalf of a driver, I think, right?
So this is an interesting case in St. Louis, and there's a great article from my friend named Dara Kerr. She worked with The Markup, which is an online long form reporting group that does this great work. And this gentleman's name was Elijah Newman. He was murdered in a Lyft, and I want you to follow me here. We're suing Uber only. So there's interesting facts here where Uber's not in the case. But this driver was driving in St. Louis a month before. There was 2 carjackings on Uber's system that were perpetrated by a guy named Torian Wilson. Torian Wilson carjacked 2 people. One of them was carjacked on the street called Peggy Court in St. Louis. And what happened was he requested rides for Uber, went and carjacked these 2 people. Both of them reported it to Uber that they were carjacked by someone. Uber then has this information. At the time, Uber has created a program called the Industry Sharing Program, where they share information about the worst acts on their system to reciprocally remove bad actors. What I mean by that is, bad actor happens on Uber, they tell Lyft, and Lyft says, okay, that's a bad act. We don't want them using our system either, because they know they use both. And so they take them both off, right? And generally this happens just with drivers, but they know that riders also use both the systems, so they should be using it both ways. A month later, a man named Elijah Newman takes the Lyft, and he's a Lyft driver, also an Uber driver, but he accepts a Lyft ride to Peggy Court. Torian Wilson is in the car, takes him to Peggy Court, to the same street where he carjacked the first guy, and Elijah Newman doesn't give up his car, though, and he shoots him in the neck. He dies on Peggy Court 3 years ago. And from that, the same policeman came out to Peggy Court in St. Louis and investigated and had already subpoenaed Uber for information, but Uber didn't supply the information. He subpoenaed them 3 weeks earlier to give information about the rider. They didn't supply it to him. He says, hey, this can't be a coincidence. This has happened before. Calls Uber again. They call Uber again. Uber finally turns over information. They arrest the guy 10 hours later, and the guy, Torian Wilson, lived within a half a mile of Peggy Court. Torian Wilson has since entered a plea deal and is serving 25 years for the murder of Elijah Newman.
And you filed suit against Torian Wilson and
Uber.
Uber.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And that is
Uber should have shared the information about this bad act.
Uber should have shared with Lyft. Uber should have told the cops.
This is a negligence standard?
It's a negligence standard, yeah.
This is in St. Louis.
St. Louis City Court, which is one of the plaintiffs believe it's a great venue.
I think defendants probably, but at least Johnson & Johnson probably thinks it is too, right?
Yeah.
What is the deal with benefits that Lyft and Uber provide for their drivers and such? Like, is there like an occupational safety hazard policy? Any sort of benefits they get if they're injured on the job?
So they are covered if they are driving under a policy, like just an insurance policy, for if they're in period 1, which is when Uber drivers are just trolling, waiting for, or Lyft, where they're waiting for the rideshare company to give them a trip. Period 1, it's a certain standard. Period 2 is when they are on the way to pick up the rider. That's a different level. And period 3 is when the rider's in the car. So all of these have different levels of insurance coverage if there's an injury that occurs. So yes.
What made you keep digging?
Well, who pissed you off? Right. Are you just that petty? That's right. Well, when you've litigated against Uber for a long time, you kind of get motivated.
Right.
And Dara Kerr talked to me about this case, and I read it, and I was just shocked by it. And knowing what Uber keeps and the data that they keep underneath, it was just incredible.
Are they incentivized to not share that data just in a super transparent way because it makes them look like an unsafe company? Mm-hmm. Is that why are they not just, here's all of our information publicly?
There are other public reports where Uber had a problem with just being too big to share this information. Like not that they were intentionally withholding it, but that they were too big of a company to have the right oversight and quality controls to make sure this stuff happened.
Right.
But that was years ago. And so I can't tell you why they didn't do it immediately. And it might be they claim that because Torian Wilson was part of a grand jury trial with one of the first carjackings the grand jury heard information to indict Torian Wilson. And from that, the judge gave the subpoena about 20 days before the murder. And so Uber had the subpoena from the very first carjacking. I don't know why they didn't turn it over, because they asked for the name, they asked for the IP address of the rider, they asked for the account information, and they asked for where he was going. And so the ticket here too is the incident report from the Elijah Newman murder that the police did say that the same email address was used on Lyft as was used on Uber by Torian Wilson. And so they had the information needed in order to transfer this information. They know that he was the same guy, basically.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to cover a couple of things. We've been going probably 50 minutes or so. So first question is for parents who have kids about to start using it, or parents who have kids that are heavily active on it. What kind of advice would you give as far as, because, you can take some steps, we're talking about what they should do, and they obviously are making a ton of money off it, so they should do a lot in my view. But what can you do as a passenger, even an adult or someone, a parent?
Yeah, so Uber's role. So first of all, if possible, never ride an Uber alone if it's late at night, and especially if you're a female. I think I think us as white dudes sitting around the table, we don't appreciate sometimes the danger that people that aren't white dudes can be in, right? We just don't appreciate that. Like, I don't get in an Uber and worry about my safety.
Yeah.
But I think if you're a woman, you're accustomed to often like looking over your shoulder when you're walking somewhere, being aware of your surroundings in a way that we may not be.
Kyle has to. He's a tiny one. I mean, he's you never know, he's going to get snatched up.
I'm also incredibly attractive, which is difficult for not just the population, but Uber drivers to assist. Yeah.
But I think you don't ride alone, right? Especially late at night. I think that's an issue. Uber's rolled out some recent safety features that allow for audio recording during the ride, which is a step where the rider has to initiate and turn it on. They also rolled out a recent feature where you can share your trip. Now, I don't know if that's going to help or not, but it's something more. It's some more oversight where someone that's not in the car with you can watch and make sure you're making it to the right place. But other than that, I don't know, right? Uber should, and Lyft as well, should increase safety controls to make sure that this doesn't happen. I will give them that they probably never can make the number zero, right? Because there are bad actors where that's just going to happen. It's too big.
And there's no way of knowing they're going to be a bad actor. There's people that actually are good at the bad acts, right? They know how to hide it.
There are people that will do something on their first Uber or Lyft trip.
Yeah. There's monsters out there. There's always been monsters out there. I mean,
but that you can't control for that. But you can control for a lot of the people that are trying to figure out a way to work themselves into a situation where it's an easy target, right? And that's difficult. I think Uber can. If I were Uber, I would turn on the forward-facing camera on every phone for every trip and have it running. And that's, I think, going to minimize a lot of people if they know they're being recorded. Yeah. Now, that's going to be a problem for their system. I mean, some drivers don't even want to be fingerprinted, right? We remember in Austin about 8 years ago.
Yeah, we'll ride Austin.
Right?
And he's Ride Austin.
Yeah, because they didn't want to have fingerprints. And that was a big deal. And so Uber knows they're going to lose a bunch of drivers. Not because all these drivers are bad actors, because they don't want to be recorded. Like, that's going to happen.
Then you get into, you don't have to be a citizen to do that, and maybe there's people that don't have certain identification.
But think about how many work sites have constant surveillance. Most of them.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to get people to look at Rideshare as a work site. And there's two big employers or two big people that hire that are running this work site, and it's Uber and Lyft. They owe a duty both to each other and to everybody that comes onto the work site. And that's to make it as safe as possible. Does that mean that something's not going to explode? No. But it means that they can reduce that. And if they know if someone's going to throw a wrench or turn on the electricity down the line, well, they better make sure that the person that's there is not going to get electrocuted.
You hear that, Peter? Somebody's got their wrench in that machine, and if the electricity comes on, you got to prevent that.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I'm hearing you. Do they have a policy? Does Uber have a policy that's, because I'm sure some people say, oh, it's consensual. This person hit on me and we just got, we fell in love.
Yep.
Do they have a policy that says, no, it doesn't matter how loving this person is towards you?
So
can't do it?
I've heard Uber say I've heard Uber people say that we have people that meet and fall in love and get married from our platform. They say that.
Mm-hmm.
Uber also has a policy that says if your rider has had any intoxicating drug, alcohol, anything, they cannot consent.
Mm-hmm.
Consent cannot occur if they've had anything that they're under the influence of.
Yeah.
And so they can't lean back on that because many times this happens when people have been out to the bars.
Why they're in an Uber.
That's right. And they market safe rides. They make you pay an extra $1 for safe rides. They
make you pay a bunch more money if you vomit in their Uber.
That's right.
A bunch of money.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I feel like sometimes almost they want you to vomit in the car.
Another $250.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, hey, you know what? Maybe y'all had a connection. How about tomorrow?
Right.
Let's just exchange numbers and you can talk tomorrow.
Correct.
Okay, so that's helpful. So the last thing I want to talk about, and I said at the beginning, so I feel like it's kind of a new thing with plaintiffs' lawyers where everyone, instead of going to a firm and you just worked at a firm and you only worked on the cases in that firm, I feel like it's kind of changing to where kind of your new structure where you've got your own deal, but you work on cases with this firm and you work on some cases with that firm. Is that kind of where you want you want your practice to be?
Right. It's exciting. It's exciting to work. I mean, look, I love Kirk Garcia. I love Craig Island and work with those guys and will for the rest of my career. I think that working with Johnson Law Group has brought some freedom and it's going to bring some other opportunities based on the business that they do and some fun new things. And so to answer your question, yeah, it's great to have that ability to do that. And that's what I'm looking for. I mean, you get to a point in your career where you're about our age and it's like, this is the time to go and to do it, right? We've got X amount of years of our just real hustle time and you're in it and you got to try to go do it.
And then you get old and
have
all the time in the world. Start mediating. You start mediating. Then you start mediating. That's right.
One day, hopefully, I'm looking over common benefit time and just having an easy,
Yeah,
I'm kidding about that.
All right, y'all got any closers on Uber stuff?
I got 1,000 more questions, but I think I threw it tonight.
All I heard was Lyft. Take Lyfts.
Yeah. Or what's Alto?
Alto, yeah. Alto.
Boy, I wonder if they would like to advertise with any podcast that Bill just gratuitously gave him a shout out for.
If only we were looking for a sponsor
and had fan
and a safe way home from this event every other Tuesday.
What is the tagline? Like and subscribe. Tell your friends.
Subscribe. Tell your friends. Smash that like button.
That's right.
That's right. Okay. Well, Bret, thanks so much for joining us. This has been very informative. Josh, I'm sure you've got some good things you can send out to the Instagram and TikTok. All right.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Good night.
I didn't realize how